Okay. So good day to everyone. Welcome. Thank you. I see some folks are still joining us and we're glad to see it. I'm Carrie Hopkins-Isles, the Deputy Director for ICU DDR, and we also have with us today Carly Searcy, who is our Project Manager, and we're really glad to have her here helping, and probably some of you have received some technical support from her, so we're grateful for that. And you've joined us today for the role of qualitative research in addiction science. I personally am really excited for this topic. I've worked closely with Dr. Pates on helping people to get their work published, working on how to improve the quality of the writing and kind of navigate some of the challenges of getting things published. And during that time, I've seen him be very passionate about this topic of qualitative research and data. And so I asked him to share some of that passion and knowledge with you all. And luckily he said yes. So that being said, I just want to say that you're welcome to put questions in the chat. And I'm sure that Dr. Pates will also give you some opportunities to ask questions. And Richard's email is also in the chat already. He's very open and willing for you to ask him questions later, if that's better for you. So with that, I will give it over. And again, thank you to everyone for being here.
Thank you very much, Carly. This is sorry, this is an important topic, I think, and I'm delighted to be able to talk about it. The difficulty is we have an hour, which is a very short time to cover what is a very big topic. And I regard this really as an introduction, and it's really based around how you can do your research and get it published. As I said, as Carrie said, that there is a my email address is on the chat, and if you want to ask me questions later, because there won't be a lot of time during the session, then please do email me and I will get back to you. And let's start the lecture. Now there is a reference: Qualitative Research Reading Materials, Publishing Addiction Science, a Guide for the Perplexed, and it is on this the available free for downloading. The whole book is from www.isaje.net. As I said, that's down to download free of charge, and it's using that chapter that I based a lot of this work on, because it's a book that we published. I belong to an organization called Iceage, which is about it's a collection of editors of addiction journals, and we're actually doing a lot more teaching and things now about how to publish, and our links with ICU DDR have been fantastic. So if you want it, that reference is there, iceage.net, and go to it for free. Okay, qualitative research. And I'm a psychologist by profession. I worked in addiction I started working in addiction in the mid-80s. I've retired now, but still do work, and I still am an editor. And one of the interesting things is, over time, how research has changed in terms of what journals will publish and what they deem to be acceptable. And as I say, the first 25 years ago, many prestigious journals didn't publish qualitative research. They deemed it not to be so rigorous or important. Now, there are something like 70 or 80 or more journals in the world publishing in the English language, plus in other languages. So there's a lot of journals, but it was very hard to get your work if it was qualitative work. Once it started being published, it was shown to be very valuable in understanding how people did what they did, rather than just measure differences. And of course, quantitative research is about saying we'll have two groups of people and we'll give one of them this this intervention will give the others a placebo and we'll measure the outcomes. That's the sort of thing that quantitative research does. There's a debate then about mixed methods, which is about using quantitative and qualitative, which again was thought to be very dubious. You should have one or the other, but it's now acceptable and it's added to our understanding of the subject. And I think working in addiction it's been a fascinating area because it is a difficult area to work in. It's an area that is often thought, you're talking about illegal stuff and people are embarrassed about it. So quite often we don't really know why people do what they do. I think qualitative research is essential to understanding why and how people use substances, which may be dangerous and life-changing. And I'll come on to talk a bit in a minute about my research for my doctorate, which was largely qualitative research. So the problems in publishing it was editors of addiction journals have noted that qualitative papers are more likely to present problems than quantitative papers, sometimes because of the way they're written. And one of the problems is that people often thought, well, I can just write down my thoughts or a few interviews with people and that will be qualitative research. But qualitative research, as quantitative research, has to be very thorough, it has to be systematic, and it has to be repeatable. One of the things about all research is, and that's why when we write research papers, we put in a methods section so you can repeat it. There are fewer reviewers competent to review qualitative papers, and I think that is increasing now. But that is true. That was true in the early days. In the addiction field, there's no journals devoted exclusively to publishing qualitative work, as there may be in others. Many journals expect papers to follow a strict format, but qualitative work often breaks with that format, putting more demands on the reader. And one of the things that we'll discuss later is sometimes you may change your research design or change what you're looking at based on what you found in your early interviews. Now, you wouldn't do that in quantitative research. So here's just different types of qualitative research. Case study research, record keeping, processes of observation, ethnographic research, focus groups, one-to-one interviews. And all of these are valid and interesting. And one of the things, pardon me, one of the things that I am very keen on qualitative research is, when I was talking to a colleague this morning, one of the reasons we both like it is that we're curious. And if you want to know why people do things, you can often only find that out really from qualitative research. And here is one theory approach to qualitative research is grounded theory. You start with a research question. You got theoretical sampling, so who are the people we'll go and talk to? You collect data, you code it, and then you get to a point which is called saturation. So what you might do in qualitative research is you don't define the number of people you'll have in your sample to start with, as you do in quantitative research, but you get to a point where you're not getting any new information. That's called saturation, where the last 3 people you've interviewed out of 15 have all said the same thing. There's nothing new coming out, and that's saturation. So there's a constant comparison, and then you have a theory which is based on what people have told you. So that was a very quick and dirty description of grounded theory. And one of the things is, if you want to do qualitative research after this webinar, I suggest you go and get a good book on it and read it thoroughly, because there's a lot involved. In quantitative research, the observations typically follow a system whereby classification of the observation is already determined before the data collection starts. So you decide what it is you're measuring, and you decide what the parameters are of that. It makes it possible to gather large data sets for numerical analysis, but the understanding of the data will be restricted by the concepts on which the data collection was based. So you're asking a research question, and in quantitative research, that is the answer you'll get from your research, but you won't necessarily be able to understand anything wider than that. In qualitative research, the observations are usually fewer. The researcher's preoccupations do not determine the results as much and is often used to study social processes or reasons behind human behavior. So we're interested in what we find out, the why and how of social matters, of social interaction matters, rather than the what, where, and when, central to qualitative research. So it's a different way of asking questions, or different questions to be asked. Focuses on topics that range from historical processes to treatment outcomes, used increasingly to ask questions about alcohol and other drug policy, including rapid assessment of policy development, used to study program implementation and evaluate various policy measures, and ethnographers are increasingly using qualitative research to increase understanding of patterns of substance use in various populations. So if you've got a policy that you've introduced, you could do a questionnaire on it, and that will give you some answers. But if you do qualitative research, you may find out more about how that some of the problems of implementing a policy and that sort of things. But ethnography typically is a wide use of qualitative research. Right, here's an example, and I apologize, this is just related to me. I did a doctorate 25 years ago, and the subject was on needle fixation, which is where people compulsively inject. I think it's called needle freaks in the US, or the feel for steel in Australia. And when I started looking at it, I ignored the advice of my supervisor, who said, don't do research where there's no published work. And there was only one published paper that had been published in the 70s on 2 subjects. Now, I was, as a clinician working with long-term injecting drug users, I knew of the phenomenon, but I didn't know why people did this. You know, I was working intimately with people who were injecting mainly amphetamine and heroin, and some of them, when you put them the heroin injectors onto methadone, for example, they would still be injecting, and we didn't know why they were doing this really. So I undertook a survey of a large number of injecting drug users to establish the extent of the problem. That was the quantitative research part. And then I interviewed a dozen people who identified as having the problem to find out why. And this helped enormously in treatment, but also to develop a scale. Then I developed a scale called the Need-Fix scale, which has been published, to determine the reasons why they did it, of course. And I found out there were a number of reasons. And it was things like some people did it as part of sexual behavior with a partner. Some people got a sexual thrill out of it. Some people liked the pain that they experienced from it. There are a whole range of reasons. And when you get people injecting things like water and other inert substances or alcohol, then you begin to question that it's not just about the heroin. And interestingly, because it was published a long time, or the work was done a long time ago, when I first published, people were saying, "Oh no, this doesn't exist. It's just people wanting more drugs." But I think we showed that that was not the case. But that's just an example of how, by doing qualitative research, I started understanding a problem that was very present in addiction treatment and what we could do about it. Right. How might we do it? Typically, qualitative research is undertaken by interviewing the people from whom you wish to gather data. Usually, you'd interview fewer subjects, than you would in quantitative study, and the number is often defined when saturation is achieved, i.e. no new data forthcoming. So the point is that if you are doing some quantitative research, you might have 2 groups of 50 and compare them. If you're doing qualitative research and you've interviewed, as I said, 15 people, and then you find that you're getting no new data, then you've reached saturation and you can then, stop. You do not necessarily know what to expect, as people reveal information in their interviews, and therefore you may have to change the parameters of the study during the study. And this is one of the things that's the big differences between qualitative and quantitative work. In quantitative work, you start with a research question and you stick to that. You don't change anything, and your research answers that research question. What you might find is that during qualitative research, certain things come up which you didn't expect. So you might start changing the interview schedule in order to find out, how common is this, or what is, whether it is a common experience or something like that. You will hope the lived experience of your subjects, who can discuss the experiences and feelings without constraints of the framework produced by a questionnaire, as you might use in quantitative work. And that's one of the things that you are doing, rather than just giving someone a questionnaire, which is a fairly cold and anonymous thing. You are talking about their lived experience. And acknowledging, as I said, one of the problems is that you're talking about behaviours which may be illegal, or certainly may be socially disapproved of. So getting that honesty with lived experience is really important. In qualitative work, the collection and processing of data, one of the problems is there's pictures in front of some of the scripts. I can't read it all. The collection process of the data are more closely intertwined than in quantitative research. As they collect the data, they will not be able to avoid interpreting the data. Depending on interim results, methods can change during the study, which is what I've just said. So it's very difficult to just say, this is what we're going to do, and we're only going to do this. I think you sometimes have to make those changes because of what you're finding. And this presents a challenge to the researcher to explain in a short article why this has happened, and why one has used a different method in the final stages of data acquisition. So one of the problems as the editor of a journal is that we have to set page limits, because we have page limits or word limits. We have page limits from our publisher. But qualitative articles tend to be longer because of things like this, because you may have to explain why you've changed the method during the research. You'll also probably want to include a lot more quotes from people, which does take up space. Qualitative analysis is not limited to a demarcated data set in the way quantitative work is. So it's not limited in that way. Good researchers keep a field diary to make notes of their discussions, produce a model to which they limit their analysis. They may record during the analysis a detail they've not recorded, but which may affect the analysis. Researchers have to describe this in an honest and convincing way. So in a sense, it's possibly more difficult to do this work because you have to be very aware of it all the time, what you may be changing, and you do have to keep notes. There's no point in going to the end of the research then thinking, now what did we do? What did that person say to me in interview 5, or why did I change that? So you do need to keep notes. Assessment criteria for qualitative studies. And this is really, if you want to publish your research, the article should be provided with a structured abstract. And one of the things that we encourage in all journal publishing is structured abstracts. Now, it used to be just a paragraph about the research. So your structured abstract should be there to say what you did, why you did it, and what the results were in a very brief manner. Sampling should be described and justified, including an explanation of the criteria used. Why did you do it that way? Why did you use this sample of people? And how did you choose them? The theoretical background of the entire study or individual methods should be described to show that the sample and the data collection were consistent with the study's theoretical background. The context in which the study was carried out should be described. Where did you do it, and how did you find the people? Detailed description of research intervention should be included and how the subject responded. Detailed description of how the analytic methods were applied and used, and how they were used, and the tools for minimizing bias and validation of the results presented. And one of the things you have to be very careful of, I think it's true of all research, and we know that this does happen in research, is limiting bias. Because if you come to this problem with a very fixed view of what you think the answers are, then you may may result in bias in your findings. Description of the manner of data processing, technical aspects, and procedures is needed. And as I said at the beginning, you can't just sort of write something down as notes and expect people to accept it. Description of outcomes and their interpretations are obviously necessary, including a discussion of the limitations. And this has become increasingly important in all papers, whether they're quantitative or qualitative. What are the limitations? Because every paper ever published has limitations, and it's much better that you describe them than the person who's going to review the paper. And the evaluation criteria, the research issues and the research questions and goals derived from it should be properly presented. Goals should be textually embedded and put into a theoretical framework with an analysis of the present state of knowledge. The author should argue for the importance of their study against this background. What are the issues or questions the results should contribute to, and how will they move the field forward? And I really do think that the field of addiction is fascinating, because I think, having even worked in it for so many years, I realise sometimes I know less about it now than I ever did from the beginning, because it is such a huge question, it's such a huge issue, and things change, and things change with events that happen. Things like, I know that in the States at the moment you've got a huge epidemic of opioid prescription opioid use, and why did that start, and how did that start? That's an interesting question, because it wasn't the case maybe 10 or 20 years ago. HIV produced things which, again, was something that we didn't expect, or when it started, it was we didn't realize what a huge important thing it is. Or COVID, when COVID was first discovered 2 years ago, it's about 2 years ago now, isn't it? We didn't know what the impact would be, but the impact of that on addiction services has been enormous, because as people have been restricted movement, they have had less chance to get treatment. They may have been at home more, they may have drunk more, they may have used drugs more, or they may not have got their drugs or whatever. So there's a change all the time. Control tools such as research logs, control points should be reported, and how ethical problems were handled, e.g. the use of informed consent, careful of adherence to research protocols, manner of preparing the research team to manage risky or problematic situations. Right, here's some practical advice for publishing a qualitative article. Consider the format and structure of your article. Get acquainted with a number of addiction journals and look at the qualitative articles, and you will realize they differ depending on the topic they are published, depending on the topic and where they are published. You can choose a specific journal and follow the format used. If you want a greater choice of journal for your manuscript, especially if you're not an experienced researcher, choose a traditional structure for your research report. And one of the important things, or one of the interesting things about addiction, is that we are a field of science which comes from so many different backgrounds. So I've worked with nurses and doctors and psychologists and social workers and et cetera, or researchers. And so if you think about it, we all have our own, what we call our own mother science. We all have our own backgrounds that we come from. So you could publish your work perhaps in a journal related to that, rather than an addiction journal. I could go to a psychology journal and publish in that. So there is a wide range of possibilities. Begin with the abstract. All addiction journals require a short abstract covering background, aims, data and methods, results and discussion. It is always a good idea to construct a short abstract before you begin the writing, which will guide you. Before you begin the writing, which will guide you and ensure the text is coherent and logical. And that's what an interesting thing I do sometimes with people who are, when I do webinars on or seminars on publishing fiction science, that get the students to write an abstract for a piece of work they would like to do. And it's a really interesting exercise, because it makes you think about the things, and it does then when you come to do it, it makes it much easier. So what do you be your methods? How are you going to do it? How are you going to get your samples? What are your research questions and all these things? So the abstract is actually very important. It's not just a a thing to finish with at the end and when you come to submit. Choose the title that corresponds with the content. At one time, you used to see a lot of very sort of cute titles and things, people trying to attract attention. You shouldn't do that because it doesn't. They don't last well. They don't age well. But also, more importantly, when people come to search for your the subject of which you've written, your abstract and title will appear on the databases, and that's why people will choose to read your work. So the title is very important. It indicates what you are interested in and will generate more readers who are really interested in your research and probably more citations. Sometimes it's possible to formulate the title so that it also describes the data you have used. A title should not promise too much or be too fancy. And as I said, don't forget the title and the abstract will be what appears on search engines. So it's important to have these accurately reflect your research. And it's interesting because, of course, that again in my lifetime has changed. And I'm probably much older than anybody in this webinar. But when I was at university, we had a library, and to look up the background of the research you were doing, you'd go to something called Psychologist, which is a book, and it would publish abstracts of all the papers published in previous years. You couldn't do it on a computer. So you can imagine the amount of data you could actually access was much more limited than it is now. These days, you go onto any database, whether it's Google Scholar or Athens or whatever, and you will find often a huge amount. And therefore, you need to choose very carefully what papers you want to look at. And therefore, the title and the abstract of what appears. So these will be the things that people will be looking for to say, right, that's the paper we want. State the research question early and clearly. Do not embed the research question too deeply in the text. State it early, maybe as a subheading of the title. And what I usually do, and what I usually encourage people to do, is perhaps at the end of the introduction, is put the research question in there. So it is quite clear that this introduction, the literature review, has led to this research question, and that's the context of it. Sometimes the reader will find different research questions in various sections of the text. Some may even be contradictory. If new insights are found, the research questions change the report. Focus on specific findings answering a specific question. And as we've said earlier, if you do have to change your research because of results that you are finding, you need to report that and explain what you found and why you have changed that report. If your report has found many unexpected answers, maybe there's an opportunity to write several papers rather than one confused paper. And that's one of the things that I encourage people to do if they have written a paper that is too long, or that maybe has two or three important findings. It may be worth breaking that down into 2 or 3 papers. I mean, one of the things that is interesting is that when people have done their doctoral dissertations or master's dissertations, they will have a document which may be 70, 100,000 words long. And you may be then trying to put that into a paper 3,000 to 5,000 words long. So think about making it clear. I mean, that's true of any research, really. If possible, phrase the research question so that it reflects the scientific ambition of the study. Conduct a thorough review of earlier research. A good review of earlier research is essential for your claim that you are contributing new knowledge. If a referee finds you have overlooked important literature or you have misinterpreted previous results, they will review your work with skepticism. And this is one of the things that I mentioned earlier about bias. Sometimes you'll find that people will only select literature which confirms their point of view. And if you do that, then that is clearly biased. You should quote work which contradicts your work, and then explain why it's contradictory and why it is different. Don't limit yourself to work from your own country, but to ensure to cover what has been written about your own culture. So it is important to look widely. And one of the problems, I think, about and this is a problem probably for both US and UK researchers, is that there's a tendency sometimes to look at research that has just come from those cultures, but there is a big wide research area from other countries and often overlooked. The literature review should not be solely descriptive, but use it to position yourself to other researchers. That's what I'm saying. What conclusions from others' research sheds light on your research? What's missing from earlier research? And the literature review is the opportunity to discuss that. Why are you doing this research? What have other people found? Why is your work different? And what is missing? I mean, one of the interesting things you'll see at the end of most papers, they'll say, more research is needed on this topic. And one of the realities is that's true on nearly every topic, because once you've done some research, someone else will come along and say, "Oh, that's interesting," and I wonder why they found that, and they'll continue to question it and research it. When you produce a good review of earlier research, you also have defended your theoretical and methodological position and your choice of data. Present enough information in the methods and data section. Inadequate methods are often the most common reason for a qualitative paper to be rejected. It's important to justify your choice of methods. If you use several methods, explain how they complement each other. And one of the things that I really emphasize when I'm teaching about publishing or teaching about writing papers is that you should be able to pick up the method section of a paper and then go and repeat it with a different sample. So it's really important that you really fully justify what you're doing and why you're doing it. We must argue that the size of the sample is sufficient for your purpose. And this is often a common thing with quantitative research. People don't have a sufficiently large data sample, and sometimes people submit papers to me with where the sample isn't big enough really, and I would say, let's describe this as a pilot study, and then we can actually get away with a smaller study, but then you need to do more research on a fuller sample size. With qualitative data, of course, as we've said, you can't always know how big that sample is going to be, but you do know that you need to get a sufficient sample size. Now, one of the problems with this is if you're talking about a very unusual phenomenon, that may be quite difficult to do. But nevertheless, it's important to try to get that sample large enough. How extensive is your data set? How many interviews, meetings, or observations? So how did you do it, and what was the size of it? Explain why your data set is most illustrative and useful to answer the question you're posing. Explain how did you pick your sample, what criteria did you use, what are the variations within the data sets, e.g. age or gender. And that's also very important, because I've also had papers which present perhaps a sample which only includes women or men, or only includes people of a certain age, and this is clearly going to affect the sample. So, and that should be reflected right back in the title. So if you are using only one gender, you must actually say what you're doing. How are the data produced and collected? How these conditions may have influenced the data. How did you present the study to the participants? If you use focus groups, describe the dynamics. And focus groups are interesting because of course, people get together to talk about a topic and they focus on it, and it's led by someone, but it's the data that comes out from the subjects that's important. And you typically get this with marketing and things, where a company might want to find out how its product is received. And you can't always decide what it's going to be before that focus group meets. So it's a very interesting method to use. Link the results to the research question. The presentation of results is easy to follow if the structure is, and I can't see the last bit of that sentence, but in the research question, if it moves in logical steps according to the theory and method and uses the concepts presented earlier in the article. So again, one of the things that I find very frustrating as an editor is when you get a presentation of results which should be clear and easily presented. They should reflect the way that it has been presented earlier. Present your data in a systematic way in the body of the text, so the quotations, field notes, and other documentation are easily identifiable. And quite common in qualitative research are quotations from your subjects, and usually put them in perhaps a different type of font. So you may put them in a bold font or an italic font, something like that. And usually an identifier at the end, which may be just a name, but that doesn't be their real name, but just so you can see how many different people there are. Citations or other illustrations must be clearly contextualized. For observational data, state whether you collected the data yourself or if you used data collected by someone else. Give enough raw data, direct citations, but not too much. If the results are contradictory, declare the fact openly, explain how this occurred and what it may mean. And sometimes, again, as an editor, you will find that there's far too many quotations, and they don't add something. You can use them to illustrate something, and that's very useful, but be careful you don't overuse it. The discussion section, restate the main findings and relate the work to earlier research. After a short summary of your research question and your motivation if you wish to explore it, you can repeat in one question the main result of the study. And it is interesting how people, I think, misuse the discussion section of a paper, because they sometimes introduce all sorts of new papers and new ideas. That should all be in the introduction. But you can then discuss how your results relate to previous research. So if you quoted previous research in the introduction, you can then refer back to it. Does it complement or challenge existing research? Refer, if possible, to previous qualitative research. Has your research been important for the research community or a larger audience? Do the results change the picture of a similar phenomena in other cultures? What are the concepts that can be transferred to other settings? And that again is important, that you do embed your work in a culture. So if you are talking about something which you've found that American college professors might do, you can't extrapolate that to say that African farmers might do the same thing, because they're different cultures, different people. The discussion section should also contain a limitations section. I did mention that. Did problems with data collection or sampling restrict the possibility of getting a full answer to your question? What other data could make the research more complete? Could you have used an additional or alternative method? Remember, if you don't point out the limitations, then a reviewer might well. And it is much better that you do it, and it has much less chance of being rejected if you've actually highlighted what the limitations are. Give recommendations for future research that would improve knowledge about the topic you've studied. And as I said earlier, there's always more work that can be done on any topic. Additional advice: save your good data for scientific articles. Much qualitative research is published as reports that would have limited distribution or monographs. A scientific article will have a greater impact and kudos, and if the subject is large enough to publish in a number of scientific journals. And that's really important, because one of the things that is one of the reasons why peer-reviewed papers are so important is that they form the basic knowledge, the basic scientific knowledge of our subject, whether it's physics or addiction science or whatever, but it's really important. Choose the right journal. An addiction journal that publishes qualitative research, a journal for qualitative research, or journal of sociology, anthropology, history, psychology, etc., etc. So there's a whole range of things you can choose, but check that the journal you've chosen will publish that sort of work and publish that paper. Check if the journal has word limits. Qualitative papers are often longer than quantitative papers. Check that the journal has published qualitative work previously. And one of the things that I do say to people is that One of the really important things is that you read the instructions for authors that every journal has on its website, and that will contain things like the word limits. But I also say to people, that you can write to the editor to say, look, this paper is longer than your word limits because X, Y, Z, and would you still consider it? And I'm very happy to consider things like that. But if people don't do it and just put the work in, then that is annoying. It's often worth recommending a referee, as journals often shorter experienced people to review papers, especially qualitative papers, and you may well know people who know about your subject. And if you've been doing work on a subject, you could know as much or more about it than anyone else around, but you might also know the people who actually do know about the subject, and you could recommend as reviewers. So it's well worth doing that, and I think the journal will thank you for that. And I think that's the end of the show.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat or in the Q&A. Is there a particular software you recommend for analysis of qualitative data?
No.
Oh.
So I say that I'm just trying to get rid of this thing on my screen.
You can stop sharing. Usually you have to bring your cursor up to the top.
Yeah.
And then it'll show you where you can stop.
Oh, right. Yes, it's come back into sight.
Yep.
That's better. I can see people now. No, sorry. That's I think one of the things that you probably need to do is to find a good book about qualitative research and use that for looking at what software you might use. Because one of the problems is that there's such a range of different techniques and a range of different things in qualitative research, and you may not be well. You don't have the extensive statistic analysis that you do with quantitative research, but you will be writing a lot and abstracting and editing, and I think that's probably as important as the software.
So then a follow-up to that would be, do you have any books that you recommend about qualitative research?
Well, as I said, the book that I recommended, um, the book that I recommended at the beginning has a reference list at the end, and that's probably the best source to go to because it's quite a comprehensive list. As I say, it's free of charge, and it will be well worth you having that.
And I did put it in the chat as well. And which actually leads me to a question, Dr. Pates, are folks able to get your PowerPoint? Are we able to share that with people who are?
Please do. Yes, I always say, yeah, share the PowerPoint, and from that you may well come back with questions for me, and I'm very happy to do that. As I said, I forgot to put my email address on it, but I think ICEDDR, wonderful all coordinators, have put that on there for you into the chat, so that is there. I noticed there was a question from Peter in the chat.
Is it right to keep revising your abstract after you have done your full paper, but before you submit for publication?
I think that it is. I think that's quite acceptable because one of the things that if you start out at the beginning with what your abstract is, but then it might change, and I think it's what you want to do is to get that paper published, and so you need to consider keep revising it until you're happy with it. So it's fine to do that. People said they don't see the book link in the live chat. It's actually on the presentation. It's the second slide in the presentation. So if
I'm putting it in the chat as well. I'm actually going to go more directly to it because I know you had the.
okay, but yeah, so Kerry will certainly.
So what I posted earlier was just the Iceage website, but this is more directly. But I will encourage you to just go to iceage.net because there are a lot of resources, not just that one. So
This is the book. You probably can't see it very well. It's published in Diction Science, but it does have a where is it? It has probably about 30 or 40 references at the end of the chapter. So, it will cover everything you want. It should do.
And someone asked, are there any good examples to share of qualitative papers or articles?
It's a good question. I can't think of things at the moment, but it's worth going to journals just to look through them. And I'll have a think about it, and if I can, I'll let Carrie know, and we will
Yeah.
and we can share that with you later.
Yeah, maybe if you have any, or I will say, and this is kind of big picture, but if anyone is familiar with Renee Brown, her work is grounded research, like Richard was mentioning earlier, and qualitative in nature. So a lot of her, you could look on reneebrown.com, and she has a research section, and it's not specifically substance use disorders, because she does do work on substance use disorders, but she does work on shame. That's a lot of what it is, but it's grounded theory and qualitative. So they do hundreds and hundreds of interviews, and then like Richard was saying, when you get to that stasis of okay, now we're just getting the same information, then they kind of go from there. So she would be at least one, just off the top of my head, good qualitative researcher that would be worth looking at. And I put her name in the chat.
Yes. The answers to Peter's question, yes. One of the things that I am very keen on doing is to publish work from what we call LMIC countries, developing countries, call them what you want, because they often have some very interesting things to do. Now, the next question says sometimes they're a bit expensive, but many journals like mine, and also in the book Publishing Addiction Science, in a previous chapter, there are a list of journals and whether they charge. We don't charge you anything. If you submit to us, we won't charge you anything for publishing. It is often the open access journals that will ask you to pay to have your paper published, because then they let people do it free of charge. But as you probably know, that if you go to research a paper, it's you may have to buy it from the database.
Before we move on, Richard, to the next question, I just want to reinforce what you were saying there in two parts. One is that I have personally seen Dr. Pates work really closely with people from all different areas around the world to try to help them to get their papers published in, especially with, English might be a second language. So when I saw that question, I was kind of chuckling because I know that that's something that he is really passionate about. Also, I would just caution you to be careful about I guess kind of proprietary, or like some of them are, predatory, where they're like basically trying to get you to pay to get your work published. So just being careful with some of that.
Yeah, yes, I would reiterate that as well. And you see, sometimes I get adverts from journals saying, "We will review your paper in 2 weeks and we will get it back to you," and blah blah blah. This is nonsense. You cannot get a paper published that quickly, because if you send me a paper, I will send it out within a week to two reviewers. The reviewers may then say, "No, I don't want to do it." So it may take me weeks to get the reviewers, and then they take a month to review it. So it can never be done that quickly, and it's important that people do that. Right, many journals, particularly handback journals, want there to be multiple coders and offer authors to report into rate reliability, kappa coefficient. Do you see multiple codes being necessary for marker for quality papers, always having one person doing the qualitative analysis okay in your mind. I think it's fine to just do it, because the lovely thing about qualitative work, and that's what I say because I'm a curious person, is that that it's often one person's work or a small group of people. So I think it's fine getting one person to do the analysis. One of the things I always say is when you're writing a paper, always get someone else to check it, because it's very easy to make mistakes. That you've been working on something for so long, you don't notice the mistakes anymore. And I've done this as much as anyone else. So I think it's fine to have one person to do the analysis. Get someone else to check it, though. It's worth doing. And Gladys has asked about the name of the journal. Is that the name of my journal, Gladys? The name of my journal is the Journal of Substance Use. And you can find it on the website. You can find the website there. Yeah. But I am very passionate about getting work from low and middle income countries, developing countries. And interestingly, at the moment, I have a paper, and this shows you why I sort of stuff that I'm prepared to look at is people using lizards and animals that produce psychoactive substances, and people lick them, code licking and that sort of thing. And I've had a paper from somewhere in Asia on that, and that's I'm prepared to look at that because it is interesting and it's different.
Great. Well, we have less than 5 minutes, so I don't know if we have any additional questions before we wrap up. Anyone who would like either, well, we'll post the recording on our website so you can find that. But if you do want the PowerPoint or need any other information, you can reach out to me and I'll happily either get you in touch with Dr. Pates or supply that information depending on what you need. Any last questions? Thank you so much to Dr. Pates and to all of you for being here. We're so grateful. I do want to let you know that we have a webinar happening on March 22nd that is also related to research processes. It's going to be in Spanish, however, it will be simultaneously translated into English. So check out our website. I'll put that in the chat as well, icuddr.org, to find out more information. And we hope that you'll join us in the future for additional webinars and other trainings. And thank you again for your time.
And thank you to Carey for inviting me to do that. It's been lovely to talk to you all. But I really mean it. Please do get in touch if you have further questions, want further information, or if I can help in any way, because it's a lot of information to absorb in an hour. So.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for your perfect presentation.
Thank you, Catalina.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Be well.
Thank you.